Imagine receiving a medical result that could change your entire life. Now imagine the machine behind it was not what you were promised. This story began with an idea almost everyone wanted to believe. A few drops of blood would replace frightening needles and full vials. Results would arrive faster, cost less, and become accessible almost anywhere. It sounded humane, efficient, and perfectly suited to a technological age. That promise helped create Theranos, one of Silicon Valley's greatest illusions. At its peak, the private company was valued near $9 billion. Its founder, Elizabeth Holmes, became the public face of medical disruption. But the promised testing platform never performed as broadly as advertised. More than a failed device, this story shows how hope can weaken the demand for proof. Theranos was founded in 2003, when Holmes was 19 years old. She left Stanford and pursued a vision of transforming diagnostic blood testing. The problem she chose was real and emotionally powerful. Many people fear needles, delay tests, or struggle with medical costs. A painless finger prick therefore sounded like more than convenience. It sounded like a new relationship between patients and healthcare. The company's best-known early analyzer was called the Edison. The vision was simple enough for anyone to understand. A tiny sample entered a cartridge, and many reliable answers emerged. Complex laboratory science was transformed into an elegant consumer experience. Investors did not need to understand every chemical reaction. They only needed to believe that old medicine was being replaced. In technology, secrecy can sometimes protect a genuine competitive advantage. Employees were divided into teams, and information was tightly controlled. Questions could be treated as disloyalty rather than responsible scientific doubt. In medicine, however, doubt is not an enemy of progress. It is one of the systems that protects patients from avoidable harm. A medical claim becomes trustworthy through evidence, replication, and transparent validation. Theranos often substituted reputation and confidence for those slower safeguards. Prominent supporters helped create an atmosphere of institutional authority. Major investors saw other respected people already standing beside the company. A national pharmacy partnership made the technology appear commercially proven. Media profiles repeated the image of a young visionary changing healthcare. Every new endorsement made the previous endorsement appear more reasonable. This is the psychological power of social proof. People often trust a claim because credible people appear to trust it. But those credible people may be relying on one another. Theranos began offering tests through retail locations, especially in Arizona. Patients encountered polished centers designed to feel modern and welcoming. The experience made the technology seem ready, regulated, and dependable. Yet behind the public presentation, the laboratory reality was far more complicated. According to the Securities and Exchange Commission, the proprietary analyzer was limited. The SEC alleged it could perform only a small fraction of advertised tests. The agency said most patient testing used modified commercial analyzers from other manufacturers. Those conventional machines were not the revolutionary system investors thought they were funding. Small fingerstick samples also created difficult handling and dilution problems. Laboratory measurements can be sensitive to sample volume, preparation, and contamination. A beautiful promise could not remove those physical constraints. Inside the company, some employees raised concerns about accuracy and quality control. When evidence challenged the narrative often remained stronger. Investors were shown demonstrations and materials that reinforced technological success. But a demonstration is not the same as independent clinical validation. Theranos also made claims extending beyond the laboratory itself. According to the SEC, investors heard that the technology served battlefield operations. The agency said it was never deployed by the Defense Department as claimed. Financial projections were also dramatically disconnected from operating reality. Theranos projected more than $100 million in 2014 revenue. The SEC said actual operating revenue was only a little above $100,000. That difference was not a minor forecasting error. It was a gulf between the company investors imagined and the company operating. From late 2013 through 2015, Theranos raised more than $700 million. The funding gave the company time, prestige, and the appearance of momentum. Surely, people thought, so much money could not be completely mistaken. But capital can measure belief without measuring scientific truth. Healthcare technology requires evidence that money alone cannot manufacture. In 2015, regulatory and journalistic scrutiny began breaking the protective circle. FDA inspectors examined Theranos facilities and recorded quality system observations. An FDA inspection form noted weaknesses involving validation, documentation, and risk analysis. The form itself stated that observations were not a final agency determination. Theranos had received FDA clearance for one herpes simplex virus assay. That limited clearance did not validate the company's entire advertised testing menu. One approved assay could nevertheless strengthen the appearance of broader legitimacy. In October 2015, the Wall Street Journal published a major investigation. Reporter John Carreyrou described reliance on conventional machines and internal testing concerns. Theranos strongly disputed the reporting and defended its technology. One side offered a revolutionary mission and years of prestigious support. The other offered documents, sources, technical questions, and growing regulatory concern. This is where belief becomes psychologically expensive to abandon. Admitting doubt can mean admitting that admired institutions were also mistaken. It can mean accepting that confidence was mistaken for competence. Theranos had become more than a laboratory company. It had become a symbol of progress, ambition, and female entrepreneurial success. But scientific criticism is not opposition to innovation. It is how useful innovation is separated from dangerous illusion. As investigations continued, the company's claims became harder to sustain. Retail relationships weakened, testing operations contracted, and regulators imposed serious sanctions. Theranos eventually withdrew or corrected large numbers of test results. For affected patients, the damage was not merely financial or symbolic. Medical tests influence fear, reassurance, diagnoses, and treatment discussions. An inaccurate result can create anxiety even when later corrected. It can also produce false reassurance when further examination is needed. Not every Theranos test was proven wrong, and not every patient was harmed. But uncertainty itself was unacceptable where reliability had been promised. The scandal therefore exposed a conflict between two different cultures. Silicon Valley often celebrates speed, secrecy, disruption, and ambitious storytelling. Clinical medicine depends on validation, documentation, repeatability, and cautious disclosure. A software error may be repaired after launch. A medical result can influence a decision before anyone discovers the error. Theranos treated the language of disruption as though healthcare followed ordinary startup rules. But biology does not respond to confidence, branding, or investor enthusiasm. Eventually, the legal system focused on what investors and patients had been told. In 2018, the SEC charged Theranos, Holmes, and Ramesh Sunny Balwani with fraud. The agency alleged years of false or misleading statements about technology and finances. Holmes and Theranos settled the civil charges without admitting or denying them. Holmes paid a penalty, surrendered shares, and accepted leadership restrictions. Criminal charges followed in federal court later that year. The trials required jurors to separate failure from intentional deception. A startup can fail honestly, even after enormous promises and sincere effort. Fraud requires evidence that people were knowingly or recklessly misled. In January 2022, a jury convicted Holmes on 4 investor-related counts. She was convicted of conspiracy and 3 counts of wire fraud. The jury acquitted her on patient-related charges and several other counts. It could not reach unanimous verdicts on 3 additional investor counts. That mixed result should not be simplified into claims the jury never made. Holmes was later sentenced to 11 years and 3 months in federal prison. Balwani faced a separate trial involving both investor and patient allegations. In July 2022, a jury convicted him on all 12 charged counts. He was sentenced to 12 years and 11 months in federal prison. These verdicts established criminal responsibility for specific proven schemes and representations. They did not turn every rumor about Theranos into a verified fact. The offices closed, the valuation disappeared, and the celebrated future never arrived. Yet the deepest lesson is not that investors were foolish, nor is it that patients were naive for wanting easier healthcare. The desire behind Theranos was understandable and remains valid. People still deserve testing that is affordable, accessible, accurate, and less painful. The failure was not in wanting that, but in allowing hope to replace verification. Authority also played a crucial role in sustaining trust. Influential names reduced the perceived need for technical expertise. Commercial partnerships looked like proof, even when partners lacked complete information. Media attention looked like confirmation, even when journalists repeated company claims. Secrecy looked like intellectual property protection, even when it blocked scrutiny. Confidence looked like certainty, even when the science remained unresolved. Each participant sees another respected participant and assumes diligence happened elsewhere. Responsibility becomes distributed until almost nobody feels personally responsible for verification. The most valuable question is therefore not, who was fooled? It is, what made careful people stop asking for evidence? Theranos offered a future that was emotionally easier than the present. It promised less pain, lower cost, faster answers, and greater personal control. Those benefits were so desirable that skepticism could feel almost cruel. But healthcare does not become kinder when standards are lowered. True compassion requires results patients and doctors can safely trust. The promised Theranos platform was not merely a product that arrived late. According to regulators and criminal evidence, its capabilities were repeatedly misrepresented. The billion-dollar valuation reflected a story far larger than the working technology. That story survived because it connected ambition with deeply human needs. Fear of needles opened the door, and authority held it open. Social proof filled the room, while secrecy kept independent evidence outside. By the time doubt became unavoidable, hundreds of millions had already been invested. Patients had already placed real medical trust in the company's reports. The lesson is not to stop hoping, but to demand stronger evidence when consequences are greater. The more revolutionary a medical claim appears, the more rigorous scrutiny it deserves. Charisma cannot validate an assay, and prestige cannot calibrate a machine. A compelling founder story cannot replace transparent performance data. Theranos did not collapse because society asked too many questions. It grew for years because too few questions received verifiable answers. If this story changed how you view trust, share your perspective below. And subscribe to the Scam Files for more stories about why people believe. Because scams change, technologies change, and institutions change. But the human desire to believe in a better future remains.